In this clip, we're going to create a durable function to orchestrate two other functions. In other words, we're going to execute one function and take the output of that and use it as input for the next function. The first thing we need for that is a second function. The first function we'll use is our getItineraries function. We already have that. The second one will need to accept a list of itineraries and, for example, create a list of most viewed itineraries from it. That looks like a good example to make. So let's add a new function to our travelinspiration.api.itineraries project. So I choose add and then new Azure function here. So for those of you who a few clips ago wondered why I named the project travelinspiration.api.itineraries instead of getItineraries, and likewise for the function app on Azure, well, this is why. A function app on Azure, or project in Visual Studio here, can contain multiple functions. Whether you want to do that or not typically depends on how you want to scale. If you expect one specific function to experience a much higher load than the other ones, it may make sense to put it in a function app of its own. Like that, the scaling of that function app is only influenced by that specific function. Anyway, I'm going to add a second function here, a non-durable regular one. I'll name it create most viewed itineraries function. I want it to be triggered by an HTTP request. So I select HTTP trigger and let's put the authorization level at function, just like our getItineraries function. All right, here's the function. Let's implement this. I'll start by cleaning this up a bit. I only want this to be triggered with a post request, not with a get request. And let's pass through a route as well here. Say most viewed itineraries. In the function body, I'll then read out request body. I can do that with the stream reader over the body of the request. And I read until the end. That's an async call, so I need to make sure that I return a task here from the run method. And then let's get the itineraries from that request body. I can use a JSON serializer for that. Now let's deserialize that to a list of itinerary DDO. That's defined in travelinspiration.api.itineraries.model. So let's import that namespace. And what I pass through here is the request body, followed by an instance of JSON serializer options to make sure that it can support the correct casing. And there we go. Then we need to do something with those itineraries. I'm not going to implement that. This is, after all, a dummy function just to see how we can orchestrate different functions with a durable function. So after having read out the request body, all I'm going to do is return an OK object result stating that the most viewed itineraries have been created. There we go. This is our dummy second function that expects to get a list of itineraries as input. If you don't pass through a list of itineraries, this will fail, the function will crash, and we'll know that something is wrong. Let's deploy this. So I choose publish, and I click publish. The function app has been published. We're over at the portal, and we now see our second function show up here. Right, let's first run this first function. I'm not going to pass through any query parameters. We just need the output of this. All right, so here's the output. And I'm now going to copy this and use this as input for the second function. That's create most viewed itineraries function. Let's click test run here. It's going to be a post, and I'm going to add the output of the first function as input for this one. Let's run this. And here we go. Here's our message. We didn't crash. Deserialization worked. This function accepted the input we provided. Now we can go ahead and create a durable function that calls these two functions in a row, using the output of one as input for the other. Back to our codebase. To be able to develop durable functions, we need to add a package reference. Let's open the NuGet dialog. And let's browse for Microsoft.azure.webjobs.extensions.durable_task. As mentioned before, durable functions are an extension of the Azure Function Service, and that extension is powered by the Durable Task framework, which is why we need this reference. So let's install it. And there we go. Let's right-click our function project and choose to add a new function. I'm going to name this one Get and Create Most Viewed Itineraries Durable function. And if I scroll down here, I can select the Durable Functions Orchestration template. That is the one we need. Let's click Add. And there we go. Here is our durable function with a bunch of sample code in here already. Let me just switch to file scope namespaces. That gives us a little bit more viewing space. And let's run through it. First, we've got this run orchestrator method. This already implies that this is an orchestrator function. The primary responsibility here is to coordinate the execution of multiple activity functions in a specific order. In the method body, you can see that call activity async is used to execute a function with an activity trigger named sayHello. That function is defined below here at line 29. As you can see, it's a very simple function. We will have to change that, as we are dealing with HTTP triggered functions, but the principle is clear, I think. From within the orchestrator function, other functions can be called in whichever order we want, in parallel and or based on a certain condition. Our orchestrator function itself is triggered by the durable task framework because the orchestration trigger attribute is used here. These types of functions maintain state between calls. This means it can pause and resume execution, making it resilient to failures and restarts. You also see that the function sample returns a list of string. Return values are optional, but you'll often want some kind of return value. Scrolling down, we see that sayHello function. This is a very simple example function which we won't use. And then there's the HTTP start method. That's another one that's important. This is where we define the route for the HTTP trigger that will start the execution of the durable function. We want this to be triggered when an HTTP request is sent to, say, generate most viewed itineraries. The rest here can remain as is. We start an orchestrator instance, and we then return a 202 with something called an instance management payload. That will come in handy soon when we're going to monitor the function. More on that later. So this method can remain as is. The responsibility here is to start our logic when we send the request to generate most viewed itineraries. On to the run orchestrator method, because we will need to make a few changes here. I'm going to remove this example code here. And the first thing to do is decide what we want to return. For the demo, I'm simply going to go for a message stating what the outcome was. So, a string. What I want to do here is, first of all, call the getItineraries function. For that, I will need the host address. That host address is the same host address as where we are hosting this durable function. So we can use the incoming request to get a hold of that host address. But we only have that incoming request. That's the HTTP request data you see here. We only have that in the HTTP start method, and we don't have that in the run orchestrator method. Luckily, you can pass parameter values from this HTTP start method to the run orchestrator method. So what we can do here is get the host address via the incoming request. So I'll start with the scheme, followed by the host, followed by the port, followed by whatever is coming after the host and the port, minus generate most viewed itineraries. That gives us the base address where the other functions live. So a little bit of substring magic gets us there. Let me copy that to make sure I don't make any typos here. It wouldn't be the first time. And there we go. I think this should do it. And now I need to pass through this host address to the run orchestrator method. We can do that by passing it through via the schedule new orchestration instance async method. Back to run orchestrator. In this method, we can now access it via context.getInput. So context.getInput, and the host address is a string. And that is the only thing we pass through, so I can simply get the full input as a string, which will be the host address. If you need to pass through multiple parameters, often some serialization to JSON is very helpful. Alright, so we've got the host address. The first thing we want to do now is call our first function. As that is HTTP triggered, we can call into context.call HTTP async for that. There's other methods here to call functions triggered by other things like call activity for functions with an activity trigger and so on. For us, call HTTP async is the one to use. So let me store the outcome of here in a variable get itineraries response. And it's an async call, so I await it. So what can I pass through here? Well, the first thing I can pass through is the method to use, get. That is then followed by the URI I want to call. So I create a URI from the host address, followed by /itineraries. That'll work, but I want to pass through something else here. Something you can pass through is a bunch of retry options. That really helps towards improving the reliability of these calls. I do have to new up such an object, so let's do that. Let's say that if a call fails, I want to retry for a maximum number of attempts of 3. The first time being after 5 seconds. All right, that should already help. And then I pass through that object. There we go. The result is something of type durable HTTP response. On that, we can find the status code of the response, the content, things like that. The regular type of things you'd expect from an HTTP call. If the status code isn't okay, I'm going to return a message stating that getting the itineraries has failed. Otherwise, we can continue. Continuing, in this case, means calling the next function. So let me copy paste what we had here. It's also a call into context.call HTTP async. This time, I'm going to name the response create most viewed itineraries response. It's supposed to create 2 most viewed itineraries. And as it's supposed, we also need to pass through a body. And the body that we need to pass through is the outcome of the get itineraries call. So we simply pass through the content or an empty string if the content is null. And I also pass through the retry options we previously used. All right. The last thing to do is report the status. If this response isn't okay, we return that it isn't with a message stating that we have failed.